So right now, I would like to take a moment to recognize that this is the homeland of many diverse people in Alberta, including First Nations and Métis, whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory that includes Treaties 6, 7, and 8. So let's get started. What is the MIIG program? So a little bit of background information to start with. MIIG was announced December 10th of 2019. It provides funding for projects that build intercultural awareness and inclusion of multicultural and Indigenous communities. It is up to $25,000 of matching funding, and one grant per organization per year is allotted. Some of you may recall that our department previously had a grant program called the Anti-Racism Community Grant, or ARCG program. MIIG replaced ARCG in late 2019. The MIIG program includes a broader scope of activities eligible for funding in comparison to the previous ARCG program, while still including projects that address racism and discrimination as barriers to people fully participating in the social and political life of Alberta.
So the MIIG program has 4 intended outcomes. These outcomes can really be thought of as changing the hearts and minds of Albertans when it comes to inclusion and understanding of other cultures. Outcomes are basically your project's end results. And the MIIG outcomes are Albertans have cross-cultural and/or intercultural understanding. Albertans are aware of the impacts of discrimination and work collectively to reduce barriers. Diverse backgrounds are celebrated by Albertans, creating welcoming and inclusive communities. And finally, Albertans feel their cultures and heritage are valued. So if you have a concept for a project, we ask you to consider which of these 4 outcomes will be the focus of your project. While the outcomes are interrelated and involve some overlap, think about which outcome will be the primary and intended outcome of your project. Select only one outcome in your application.
The MIIG program includes 2 funding streams. The first funding stream is the Multiculturalism and Inclusion funding stream. This provides funding support to eligible organizations for multiculturalism and inclusions projects or initiatives. The second stream is the Indigenous funding stream. This provides funding support to eligible organizations for projects or initiatives specific to Indigenous peoples and/or culture. The reason for 2 grants funding streams is to make funding available to applicants that specifically acknowledge the historical and continued impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples and to advance reconciliation efforts, in addition to funding intended to foster broader community-based multiculturalism and inclusion initiatives. We ask you to consider which of these streams is the most relevant to your project concept prior to submitting your application.
Thank you, Rochelle. So on our website, alberta.ca, we have a number of resources that are intended to help you complete a MIIG application. So in the chat box, we've shared the link to our website. We encourage you to check out all of the resources here, including especially the MIIG guidelines. We also have the MIIG application assistance tool. So this tool includes about 2,000 frequently asked questions that will support you to complete an application, tips and tricks on writing a good application, and relevant definitions related to the MIIG program, such as what do we mean by intercultural or cross-cultural. The website also posts recorded information sessions like the one we're doing today, in case you find that helpful in completing an application. And finally, there's quite a number of links to resources available on the website, such as links to organizations with experience in this field and links to other resources that are available. And of course, our phone and email contact information are available on our website as well.
In a moment, we will discuss which types of organizations are eligible to apply for MIIG funding. Another common question we hear is if my organization applies for a MIIG grant, can we still apply to other government grant programs? The answer is yes. Your organization is eligible to apply to other government programs. If applying to other community grant programs within culture and status of women, such as the Community Initiatives Program or Community Facility Enhancement Program, it must be for a different project. This slide here outlines the organizations that are eligible to apply for MIIG funding. So under the provincial legislation of Alberta, there's the Agricultural Societies Act, Part 21 of the Business Corporations Act. This is extra provincial or corporations. Please note that you must have an Alberta-based address, which must be regularly monitored by an active member of the organization. Companies Act, Part 9, which is nonprofit companies, the Libraries Act, Societies Act of Alberta, and Special Act of the Alberta Legislature. Under federal legislation, the Special Act of the Parliament of Canada is eligible, and Income Tax Act of Canada and operating in the province of Alberta as a charity, a First Nations or Métis settlement in Alberta, and a university, college, or institute as defined under Alberta's Post-Secondary Learning Act. So now that we know which organizations are eligible to apply for funding, it is important to know which organizations are the most likely to receive MIIG funding. These would include organizations that best meet the guideline criteria, organizations with an annual operating budget under $500,000, and applicants that have not received prior government or Alberta funding, and those that can demonstrate the involvement of partner organizations from other diverse communities in the project development, delivery, and follow-up.
So there are really three types of projects that are eligible for MIIG funding. So training and education, capacity building, and enhancing cultural awareness through community events. The first type of project, and the type I would say we most commonly see here in the department, is training and education, including initiatives to increase cultural awareness and/or help Albertans understand the impact of discrimination as a barrier to full participation of individuals in society. So some examples are listed on the right, and these would include workshops, roundtables, conferences, community conversations, social media initiatives, resources or tools for community use. The second type of project is capacity building in community through various activities. So some examples here are sharing promising practices, research and information, developing strategies to support multiculturalism, cultural exchange and inclusion, evaluating existing initiatives and programs to eliminate barriers to accessing these, engaging community supporters, experts, elders, and partners in the project. So please note that any capacity building project needs to have an obvious public or community benefit. Projects that are insular in nature, where the benefit is only internal to your organization, are not likely to be approved. A good example is professional development for staff or volunteers, including board members. So to have a better chance of being approved, the application needs to demonstrate how staff and volunteer training will not only build your team's capacity to deliver better programs and services, but also how will they implement what they learned. And the implementation of the professional development should take place shortly after completing it. So the third and final type of project is community events that enhance cultural awareness by actively encouraging participation of diverse peoples and to celebrate the Indigenous and multicultural fabric of Alberta. To be considered for funding, these community events must meet all four criteria listed in the guidelines and on the right side of this slide. So events that involve more than one cultural group in the development and delivery of the event, fostering and demonstrating inclusion, events that build greater awareness and understanding of the diversity of people in community. They would also, it would also include active promotion to other cultures to participate in the event, and they would need to be open to the general public. So a common question about this type of project we've heard is, can the grant be used to host a community event that celebrates multiculturalism? Yes. However, the event must meet all 4 criteria I just discussed. If an event is a celebration of a singular cultural group, it may be eligible through the Community Initiatives Program, or CIP, project-based funding stream. And for more information, please visit the CIP project-based website, which Rochelle has probably beat me to it, and it's in the chat box already. And now I will pass it back to Rochelle.
Thanks, Ben. So Section 3.4 of the MIIG guidelines outlines 3 types of projects that are not eligible for funding. These would include any project that is not directly related to promoting inclusion of multiculturalism and Indigenous communities in Alberta, any project that does not meet one of the program outcomes, or projects that are fully funded through other funding sources. We ask that you consider this information before you start writing your grant application to make sure your concept for your project will be considered eligible. This slide outlines the criteria that our team looks for when we review your MIIG applications. These criteria include your organization's capacity, project viability and financial feasibility, project impacts, access, community and regional need, and other funding considerations. A common question we receive is, can the grant be used to support existing programs, or does it have to be something new? The answer to that, generally speaking, is that MIIG program is intended to support one-time standalone initiatives or new programming or resources. However, MIIG can support an expansion or new phase to an existing or previously funded program or project in the following cases. A new development or significant growth of a project requiring broadening of the scope or reach to the current project. B, an evolution in the direction or purpose of the project which requires an expansion or new phase. Or C, a complementary activity or focus that supports the initial project. We would not consider the following examples to be an expansion or new phase: the same project delivered in a different geographic location, or nominal changes in the project to include different demographics. For example, the same program marketed to a new audience. These examples would not be considered for MIIG funding. Another consideration for our team when reviewing applications over the past year and a half has been COVID-19 and whether provincial public health restrictions will have any impact on project delivery.
So we're just going to take a few moments to share some general tips about completing your application. So remember that next week, on Tuesday, July 20th, from 10 a.m. to noon, we will host another information session, which will be a walkthrough of the application form itself. You can sign up for that session as you did for this one by visiting our website and using the Eventbrite sign up tool, and Rochelle has posted that into the chat box. So we encourage you to join us for that session. It will be very interactive, and we look forward to that. So for now, prior to our walkthrough of the application next week, there are a few general tips on completing a MIIG application. So first, it's really important that you read the MIIG guidelines carefully before you start your application. The guidelines will help you determine whether your project will meet eligibility and program criteria. Projects are evaluated against these criteria. So projects that best meet the criteria will be given a higher priority for funding. You know, as an aside, there's nothing worse than going to all the effort of pulling together an application package only to find out the concept or project plan itself is not in alignment with the guidelines and can't be considered for funding. So the guidelines also tell you what is required of applicants if they are successful. To carefully review the application checklist at the beginning of the application form. So there's a number of different documents required for a MIIG application that includes the application itself, but also a budget, financial statements, direct deposit form, and void check, letters of support, quote sources, and more. So the checklist will help you make sure you've included all the necessary documents that we need to review your application. Another hint, just kind of a grant application tip in general, but is tell us the story of your project. And you can do this in the application, and believe it or not, with the budget as well. But in the application, to begin, tell us why you want to do your project. So what's the need for your project? What problem are you trying to solve, or opportunity are you trying to address? And in the middle of your application, tell us how your project will address the need or problem or opportunity that you've identified. And at the end of your story, tell us, like, what are the expected results or outcomes? How do you think you will change hearts and minds of Albertans through your project? How will you measure that change? Believe it or not, a strong budget will mirror the story you tell in your application. It's just really a story with numbers. Another tip, when responding to narrative questions, and there's 10 of them in our application. There's more, but there's at least 10. So when you respond to narrative questions, make sure your answers are clear and concise. Believe it or not, answers don't have to be long to be good, but they should be long enough to directly and clearly answer the question. So make sure you answer the question that's being asked. You want to avoid the grant reviewer getting lost while reading your answers if they provide a lot of unnecessary information. Another tip is research other organizations for partnership opportunities. So working with community partners has a number of benefits and can demonstrate that there's community support for your project. The project is more likely to be based on promising practices. The project's less likely to duplicate an existing project or could even leverage a partner's existing work. And there may be greater public benefits from the project as a result. So partners can be involved in any number of ways on your project, including providing project advice, supporting your organization to deliver the project directly. While letters of support from partners or community members are not required with your application, they are recommended as they give our team more confidence about the need for your project and assurance that the community is fully behind it. Just a couple other small tips and thoughts. So make sure you sign and date the grant agreement that's embedded in the application, and check all the check boxes within that section. Include your budget, financial statements, or bank statements if necessary. And to avoid delays in payments, should your application be approved for funding, ensure that the electronic funds transfer information form is filled out along with providing a void check. We do require both. We need the electronic funds transfer and a void check. I'll send it over to Rochelle.
Thanks, Ben. We're going to take a few moments to share some general tips about completing your MIIG project budget. Remember that next week on Wednesday, July 21st from 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., we will host another information session, which will be a walkthrough of the MIIG budget itself. That will be an in-depth session on how to complete your budget. You can sign up for that session as you did for this one by visiting our website and using the Eventbrite sign-up tool. We encourage you to join us for that session. And Ben's posted the link in the chat box there. So MIIG is a matching grant program, which means you must contribute to the project expenses an equal amount to or exceeding your grant request. By matching the MIIG funding, your organization can demonstrate its commitment to the project and community support for the project. The MIIG program provides up to $25,000 in matching funding. Your matching funding may be in the form of cash, donated labor that would be valued at $20 per hour for unskilled labor or $35 an hour for skilled labor, and or donated materials and services. These would be verified at fair market value. The matching amount can be a combination of all of these sources or only one or two. All matching amounts must directly relate to the project. It is also important to be familiar with sources of matching that will not be considered eligible. Information on ineligible sources of matching can be found in Section 5.3 of the MIIG guidelines and include any project expense deemed as ineligible for funding cannot be used as a match. For an example of this, a volunteer gift card or an operational expense like rent are ineligible project expenses. Likewise, an organization could not list a gift card or rent as a donated material or resource. Wages and salaries associated with the regular ongoing operations of the organization are ineligible. Volunteer time related to fundraising, preparing grant applications, attending meetings related to regular operations are also ineligible. So in the last slide, we discussed sources of matching that are considered ineligible. In this slide, we will briefly go over a number of project expenses that are considered ineligible as per Section 3.5 of the MIIG guidelines. It is important to not include ineligible expenses in your budget. If we receive a budget with ineligible expenses, we would remove those from the budget, which can lead to a reduction in the amount of MIIG funding you can apply for. Some examples of these are ongoing operational expenses. These types of expenses, such as the cost of rent and utilities and salaries and benefits of existing staff, are not eligible. MIIG funding is intended to support standalone initiatives, new programming or resources, as opposed to ongoing operations. Gift cards are ineligible. Participant travel, accommodations, per diems is ineligible. Administrative costs and fees, like legal fees or accounting and bookkeeping fees, are ineligible. Volunteer expenses, such as honoraria, gift cards per diems, is ineligible. Please note the exception of honoraria and gift cards for cultural protocol. Food costs that represent a primary expense of a project or event are also ineligible.
Just about forgot to unmute there. Hopefully save myself the embarrassment. Okay, so this is about deadlines and timelines. So for the March intake, we're hoping March of this year to notify groups in August of this year. And for the forthcoming September intake, we hope to notify groups in February 2022. So we ask that you keep in mind timelines for your project when you decide which intake you want to apply to. So we recommend that your project start date be after you receive notification of whether you've been successful in receiving a MIIG grant. Project expenses incurred before the application deadline are not eligible to be included in the project budget. Incurring expenses prior to approval of the application is really at your own risk, and we ask you to be cautious about that. Remember as well that projects that have been started and are declined cannot be resubmitted for funding at a later date. So the next slide is really just to demystify our process a little bit. So when you submit an application, preferably by email, the wonderful Cheryl on our team does the initial processing and intake of your submission, and then the community grants advisor, me, or the MIIG program coordinator, Rochelle, reviews your application and all supporting documents. After this initial review, you can expect to receive a phone call and/or email from us in case we have any follow-up questions for you. We generally give you anywhere from 3 to 5 business days to respond to these requests to give you adequate time to gather information. And following this stage, a grant review panel is convened, which then makes a recommendation to our department leaders on whether the project should be funded or not. So now we have come to the question and answer part of our time with you today, and I've seen some questions coming up in the chat box